our speakers today. But it will really be an exciting session, something that I think will be extremely practical for each of you. You might have different questions from a different angle, as it relates to your project and how you can integrate some of the systems technology process that they're introducing today. But do feel free to take your questions down and either ask them in the chat or during the Q&A. But today we're really excited to have Julia Hildebrand from B2B, as well as Will. They are both building community engagement technology for media companies right now, focusing on smaller projects, but they can certainly tell you a bit more about how they operate. But today, we're just excited to start a conversation on a bit more technical level, where you can start asking yourself, okay, are the systems that I have in place achieving the goals that we've thought about so much in the program so far? A lot of you are talking about building better relationships with your audience, building two-way communications opportunities, feedback loops with your contributors, with your citizen journalists, and with your audiences. And I think today will provide a really interesting insight to how to take that forward and make it really a part of your business and mission. But without any more from me, I'll hand it over to Julia and Will. Thank you so much for coming, and really excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks so much for inviting us to present. While Will and I briefly introduce ourselves, maybe I can ask you all as well to maybe post your names, organization, maybe even contact info if you want to, into the chat, so that we can also and connect. Will and I both work on the software B2B, but we're both also embedded in other media organizations. Myself, I'm working with Correctiv, and Will with the Bristol Cable, and we basically teamed up to build the software. So it's a collaborative project. And Correctiv is a newsroom in Germany. We are turning 10 next year, got our anniversary. And we're doing not just journalism. We've got a focus on investigative journalism in Germany, but also do a lot of cross-border investigations and a lot of collaborative investigations. We've come up with a tool called the Crowd Newsroom, where we involve people in our investigations. So wherever you need to get information from a lot of people about, for instance, who owns the housing market was an example. Like we built this kind of network and these kind of tools as well. We do a lot on fake news as well, and debunking fake news, etc. And then we're also building some civic tech, and that's where B2B comes in. So that just as a very brief introduction about Correctiv and where I'm based, and then over to Will.
So I also work at the Bristol Cable, which is a local newspaper based in Bristol in the UK. We are kind of like community owned. So if you join us, you kind of get like a share in the organization, and you have kind of like a legal stake in what we do. And we often use that to ask people to help decide which investigation we should do, or to try and gather information. Or so we're really trying to do a lot of the kind of community engagement, and ultimately turning journalism into a sort of two-way street, I guess. I've been actually, it's also about to turn 10. I think it's a coincidence that they're both about to turn 10. But and then also I joined originally just to help them with tech problems. I've actually got a software developer background background. So have a kind of like dual insight into the tech challenges of media organizations. I think that's probably enough.
Nice. And today in the session, like we just want to, Ryan already made a very good introduction there, but we thought it would be great if you get out of the session and basically have a bit of a framework for how to think about choosing your tools, like what is involved in choosing the tools that you're using and solving your challenges. We can't, of course, like solve all these problems now in this session, but we can also kind of offer to just take also questions afterwards. And yeah, we just want to kind of give you a bit of a framework and give you some examples and run you through some ideas. But we also would like you to start thinking about what your challenges are, maybe. So we wanted to start with a question to you, actually. And please post again into the chat, in the Zoom chat, which digital tools are you currently using? What comes to mind? Which tools can't you live without? What do you need to run your media organization, for your publishing, for your distribution, for your marketing? Like, maybe, yeah, send us a little list each of what you're using. And I notice I can't properly switch between presentation mode and looking into the chat. So just take a couple of minutes.
Does anyone have any questions about the exercise? Basically, it's just some of the basic technology software you're using, and we'll go.
Yeah, could just be your WordPress, your CMS, or yeah, I just see there, like, from Mira, is that right? WordPress, CCAN, Slack,
Yeah.
Google Business, yeah, Brevo for newsletters. This one, Maria, WordPress for the CMS, I guess. Anyone else? Metricool, haven't heard that one yet. Google Meet, social media platforms, yeah, Canva.
Already there's a lot of variety going on.
In terms of, yeah, an own CMS even, nice.
Not the most common occurrence in our cohorts, but
Yeah.
a slightly
Well,
larger scale up media company. So good for you.
but that's basically what you always find, like also in these kind of groups, and what also makes it difficult often when you try to learn from each other. There's so much variety in how newsrooms are set up. So in the end, you have to kind of always find your own way for the different things. So I'm just moving the chat around here. So Will.
So yeah, I mean, your tool stack will be made up of a lot of different things, and there's some really good examples that just come there in the chat. So we've kind of come up with these kind of broad categories, but I'm sure there's more things. If you can just go back to the previous slide, Julia.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my thing is not working. I'm back.
So yeah, there'll be the tools that you use to do your production. That might include, just simple things like office suites and stuff, publishing, distribution. So, maybe WordPress, maybe you're doing podcasts, revenue, how are you making your revenue, how are you tracking it, that sort of thing. Operations and internal communications. So, Slack or other tools that you might be using, and a whole wide range of other things. And recently I was at the Cable was at a meetup of kind of independent newsrooms in Europe, and I ran a session on what tool stacks are you using right now? And if we can go to the next slide, Julia. Then this, just to kind of show, I guess, the complexity and also just the range of tools you need to run like any sort of any size media organization. These are all kind of pretty small media organizations, and just in 45 minutes we came up with this list. And I'm sure there's like a lot of things we missed in that. And in general, you'll see there's a few columns where there's quite a lot of similarity. Interestingly, like everyone was using MailChimp, but also everyone hated MailChimp. And there's other things like that. But yeah, it's just like a very complicated landscape to navigate, basically.
Yeah. And we thought for this session, it would be nice to get everyone thinking a bit about like, what is one challenge basically that you have right now that you need to solve, like but really on the top level, top line level. So not looking at I need a new CMS or something, but really I would like to engage my audiences more in our reporting, or I would like to start a subscription model for our media organization. So really top line, is there any challenge right now on your mind? I want more like into a more multimedia publishing tools, or yeah, option. I want to get my podcast to more people. So have a little think what you would like to kind of focus on for this session as well. Like we want to basically set your mind in a certain space and thinking about one challenge. Take a minute for that to think. Ask if you.
I know we've spending a lot of time on our challenge, thinking about our questions. This, I think, can be a reflection of those conversations, very much so.
So we've got want to integrate my video content to the website and monetize it without affecting the site speed and core web vitals. Wow. So that's sort of like how fast the page loads and things like that. So tracking audiences across using different channels. I mean, that is a huge problem we have at the Cable as well, is not really knowing where people originally come from, and you know, like what has kind of caused them to convert into becoming members, for example, and that sort of thing. Platforms to sell educational courses, yeah, definitely see that. Generally, there always seems to be quite a big challenge when trying to connect different technologies together, I think. So, you know, you can use one thing on its own, but as soon as you want that thing to kind of connect to something else, then you can quite easily become quite stuck. Subscription fee. Yeah, and then yeah, the tech cost is a huge one. So I think at the Cable we spend, I have to check the numbers, but I think it's around £5,000-10,000 a year on technology subscriptions.
Awesome.
Which for us is a lot of money.
Right. Oh, yeah. Just awesome. So moving on. So here's a little framework now. Like you start, of course, always with a challenge and a problem that you want to solve. And the News Product Alliance actually has published a little framework recently, which I think is very helpful. And we kind of took it here as a bit of an orientation to suggest to you to also look deeper into this. So there are always different components and different things that you have to basically work through to figure out what is the right tool or the right combination of tools now for me. And as so often, it always starts with really understanding your own organization. So the top bubble here, really understanding the organization's mission and vision and goals. So that's probably what you've got set also through this program, maybe latest through this program. So it is like with everything, also with your fundraising, if you know that really well, it makes it much easier to also make the decisions on the right tools. And I added here as well values that you've got in your organization of how to do things. Then the second bubble to the right around technology needs and trade-offs. This is the bubble actually that we want to talk a lot about today. And then the other two bubbles, implementation planning and media processes and resources. Yeah, these are of course all like different circumstances, etc., that you need to look at to know what is possible basically, and how do you actually get this tech into your system. So yeah, we're not going to go through everything here today, but I would encourage you to use that guide actually, and with your challenge as well, to go through all the questions that the News Product Alliance put out there. It's really very comprehensive. But starting with the mission, values, etc., just to give you an example. So from the side of BAB and then also the Correctiv and the Bristol Cable, we basically have this kind of position and mission. We think independent media needs independent technology. And we want to be as independent as possible, especially from big tech. And the reason for that is that we think that we, by kind of thriving for that, we gain more independence for developing our business models. We can't get locked in so much into basically just contributing to someone else's business model, but have the flexibility to develop our ideas with our technology. And especially as digital first media, we are kind of also, in a small way, we are tech companies, because this is our main tool and part of our purpose. So our business model often really depends a lot as well on the tools that we are using. And then in front of our communities, we call it here, we want to be agents of trust. So we want to really make sure that we use the technology that also builds trust with our communities, and that we don't have, for instance, third-party players in between who, then our community members also have to interact with, etc. So this is one strong position that we take, and strong values that we have that really inform, in this case now, also how we build our own technology. And then the second thing is that we strongly believe in putting relationship building with the community members and with our audiences first, rather than deciding on stories and then pushing them out to people. So really building relationships first, looking at how do we collaborate with our communities, etc. And through that, we believe we can build relevance, trust, and loyalty with our audiences that we then call community rather than audience. And through that, we can then also make money. And Correctiv is a nonprofit organization fully running on membership system. So our content is fully free, and people donate to Correctiv, basically. So we really have to also convey that message to people that what we are doing is important, and part of that is making them part of the process and making them part of the journalism that we are doing. So yeah, this is just an example now for like what could be part of your mission that then informs what technology you need. But let's get into the next bubble. This is where it's now getting interesting. So when we look at the challenges that we have, so what are very concrete actually needs that we have for the technology? What are the requirements, including things like you probably have some non-negotiables already in your tool stack. For instance, your CMS might be something that you're really like, I won't change that for the next 5 years at least. So whatever I do, it needs to work with my WordPress or whatever. So when you look at your technology needs, these are the things you have to look at. Or what are my audience needs, of course? How well do you understand what your audience is already using? Maybe there are some needs that inform then what you want to do. As a next question to lead you towards this gray bubble of what is your concrete need now for the technology? Like look back at your challenge again that you put down earlier, and then have a little think about maybe what is holding you back right now to do that. Why can't you do it with the tools that you've already got? Or asked a bit differently, what would you like to do right now with that you can't do? Like what are the things, the single tasks basically that you would like to do? Think about workflows that you want to do. What is it that you can't do right now? You might see a few question marks in the faces. Feel free to also speak up.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute and say briefly what's holding them back, feel free as well.
Sorry, say again. Or...
Yeah, that's a very common one that we hear a lot. Someone's put technical challenges keep us stuck and we can't focus on editorial. So most people who have come into this kind of thing, you know, they don't necessarily know anything about technology, or at the very least, their expertise is, you know, journalism usually, and then they end up having to spend all their time kind of dealing with technical problems when they just want to be able to do the journalism. If anybody else wants to, unmute and kind of like say what they think their kind of biggest thing holding them back right now is, then feel free.
I'm going to give some more examples now afterwards as well. Maybe while I'm talking through the next bit, more ideas come up as well. Yep.
It's not a big problem, actually. It's just a small problem. It's gonna be a big problem soon. So we are using Ghost, and which is integrated with Stripe, and we have Stripe receipts that our paid subscribers get. But soon the Hungarian tax authority will not accept those issued by Stripe, and we have to implement something that is compatible with the Hungarian tax authority system. So that will be, and our core functionality and everything is put together with Ghost and Stripe. So this will be an issue in a year.
So you're no longer going to be able to use Stripe?
I think we will have to implement something new that will connect Stripe with the Hungarian tax authorities system. That will be our technical I don't know, issue in the upcoming future. Yeah.
That is definitely very concrete.
Yeah.
Will, you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a good example of where, you know, payment is one area where you're definitely not going to be able to like ever fully get away from some sort of, you know, regulatory body or whatever. And that's always going to be quite a difficult one. As much as we try and talk about kind of like independent media needs independent tech, there's no way we're going to build our own like payment system. So there's always limitations in the kind of compromises you have to make, which I think we'll come on to a little bit in the next section.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like a difficult one.
Yeah, I think I was still thinking a bit more top level when it comes to these ones here. Maybe I just talk through a few.
Does anybody else want to share one before we move on, or?
Maybe while we're talking through the few examples here, maybe there are things you want to post still. Maybe it inspires something as well. So as I said earlier, of course, we are very focused on community building practices, etc. So what we would hear as challenges from, or as things that people want to do and they can't right now, where they're looking for tools around this, is, for instance, having better listening practices. I think I read something about feedback loops there before as well in the chat. So being able to collect input from the community, for instance, story ideas, it could be in the easiest way, or just, being able to collect feedback and also keep track of it, I guess, as part of it. Then collaborating with community members, so really co-creating maybe. And I said earlier, like Correctiv, for instance, does something called crowd investigations, which led us to build our own tool, actually, because we weren't quite happy with what was on the market. So to collect big sets of data from people to then also be able to easily sort through and analyze and use then to gain insights for our stories, for an investigation. Then another one that more goes into the direction of community organizing that we hear a lot is like having these, I call it here, segmented one-on-one conversations. So really being able to know who is actually in my audience or who is in my community, and who was, for instance, taking part in a recent event. I want to say thank you to them, or who are my most active community members. I want to give them an extra perk at the end of the year. So being able to basically send different messages and engage in different ways with people, depending on maybe, yeah, how they have been involved with what we're doing so far, or it could also be depending on what expertise they have. So Maldita, for instance, have built a great kind of expert database for their fact-checking. Maldita is Spanish a media organization that's specialized in fact-checking, and they've got a big database of users, user expertise, that if they have to check something, and for instance, they need someone who speaks Hungarian to look into something, they can send a message directly to everyone in their database who speaks Hungarian. So these kind of needs we hear a lot. And then building, like another one is that organizations maybe want to build proper community connections. I read somewhere some people here are using Slack, maybe not just for internal communication, but also for the communication with your audience. So this is the kind of thing here where how do actually my community members also, can they be able to talk to each other as well? And then more examples here that we are confronted with a lot is when news organizations are trying to build a membership or subscription model. So tasks or challenges here would be maybe I want to give restricted access to content to my users. Everything is free, but maybe I want to restrict some of the content, or the other way around. I want everything behind a paywall, but have some things for free. Allowing one-off donations as well as recurring donations. So these would be kind of the tasks, right, that you could come up with, and the needs that you might have. And when you kind of putting together your tool stack, you kind of need a comprehensive list of all of these different needs, and really think through it, and really think about, okay, what are the different workflows that we want to facilitate? May it be now in our example on the community building side of things, or on the payment side of things. So just put everything, every single need, every single task that is there, list it, put it down, and maybe even prioritize it as well, because it is also possible that, as we learn later, there are always some trade-offs, that there are maybe some of those that are must-haves, and some of those that are maybe nice-to-haves. And depending as well on your general setup, etc., there are some maybe that you might compromise as well, some of those needs. But yeah, the way to go is put it all down. And here is now an example of a tool stack that would be very common for a newsroom that is working as we introduced earlier, like that is community driven, and that one's a membership model, or subscription model in this case as well. So this is quite a good simple overview what you need. You need your CMS, of course. This is something that you really own. Then usually everyone we talk to has some kind of newsletter platform. For some, the newsletter is a product itself. For some, it is more of a marketing tool. So that might make a difference as well in terms of your mission and values, and how you choose your tool there. So the newsletter, I think everyone has almost CMS. Yeah, sometimes these are connected as well. If you, for instance, run a Substack newsletter or something. Social media in some capacity, most people have. And then I think it becomes a bit more a question of choice. So a lot of organizations are missing a CRM, actually, so customer relationship management system. This is the place where you've got all your user data, or your member data, or your community data. So who is actually in your community, or who is paying for what you do, that is collected in a CRM. And a lot of organizations that we talk to don't think about that very early. They sometimes have the CRM as part of their payment solution, maybe, but then that's the only thing it is connected to. Or in the newsletter, you've got a kind of CRM as well. And then loads just have Google spreadsheets or something. So the question is, like, if you, for instance, are a very community-driven news medium and you want to embrace those practices, you definitely should think about having a kind of central tool that turns your Excel spreadsheets into a proper database, basically, where you make your user base really searchable, make it possible to segment, etc. That's where the CRM comes in. Then for community-driven newsrooms, also some kind of event tool is crucial, because usually maybe online or also offline, to bring people together. Events have become a very important tool, basically, so you will need a tool for that. And then surveys is what we gave as a headline here, is basically where you can do your interaction, where you gather your feedback, where you bring things in. And then payment, of course. And ideally, as you see with all these arrows here, all these tools are connected. And that's where it's often getting tricky as well. Like you want ideally to have, if you have a central CRM, you want your payment data, your survey data, your event attendance data, your newsletter subscription data. You want to know all that, right? You want that all connected. And that's where like potential comes in, and there's a way where you can actually do more than with people. Well, if you don't have that, you often feel very limited. So that's one big challenge, basically, or one big difficulty for a lot of media organizations to connect all that.
Julia, we just had a quick question in the chat I'd like to quickly respond to. This is quite an interesting question that we were literally just talking about beforehand. In your experience, what is the difference between membership and subscription? So, safe to say that actually me and Julia have got maybe like it's different ideas on what this actually means, and we actually took out a slide before this that was going to be memberships versus subscriptions, you know. So I'd be interested in what other people think as well. But for me, it's a kind of like it's just more of a kind of value-based proposition, and membership is like you're supporting this thing because it's something you believe in, and you're getting something out of it, which can be kind of like, you know, monetary, like, you know, discounts and things like that. And then there's the kind of subscription base, which is more a sort of just kind of very, it's kind of doesn't have the same kind of value-based thing, you know, you're just paying and you get something out of it. And obviously that there's a lot of blurred lines between those two things, and we were talking about how it's all very like more of a spectrum than a versus. I don't know, Julia, if you've got any thoughts, or if anyone else wants to I can see Ryan unmuting there.
Maybe just I would ask Jorge briefly to introduce where he's coming from, like not only the business challenge you have, because I understand where this question comes from his perspective, but also maybe how the questions of security are implicated in this choice. I think it would just provide some context and maybe very interesting for both Julia and Will.
Nice.
Jorge, do you mind coming in?
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm just trying to understand the difference between that. Someone in the chat is saying that is usually for the non-profit versus the profit spectrum. That is an explanation to me. But I think sometimes we mix it up, everything about this part of the communications, you know, membership, subscription. And there is, to me, is no longer a hesitation for people. But I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter of how you understand what your audiences want to do or want to be for you. Maybe it's that. I don't know, really. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Actually, Will and I, when we had this conversation earlier today, we were like, this is a whole session that we could do because there is an aspect of just like the terms, and they're very differently understood as well in different languages and different contexts. So there's not really one answer. Even the non-profit versus for-profit distinction, like we've got one newsroom we are working with as well, for-profit, and all his content is free, and he's talking about like his program as a membership basically model. And yeah, now he's thinking about putting some content behind a paywall for his members, or to say it differently, he wants some content now to be exclusively for his members. So is that now a subscription?
Oh, I got it. Oh, thank you.
So
There's quite an interesting technical challenge in it as well, I think sometimes, or a small technical challenge in that sometimes your tools will talk about subscribers or members in different ways, and then you've got like a non-universal language across your thingy, you know, like there's a lot of tools that the cable's looked at using where it talks about subscribers, and for us that isn't the right you know, it kind of devalues membership in some way, and that kind of just, I was speaking to someone the other day who basically built an entire WordPress plugin to replace the name supporter with member in all the places they found in a different WordPress plugin. So many levels.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, in front of your users, like what do you communicate, right? Because they don't care about the difference at all of the terms membership or subscription. You just need to figure out how to communicate to them what they get from you and what your value is. And yeah, so we gonna do that follow-up session. So looking back, just one back, so we were at this slide here. So all these tools, they need to be connected. So obviously you are standing in front of a huge amount of choice, and these are a lot of tools that we find quite a lot with newsrooms that we talk to. So these are really tools used by newsrooms. And what I just want to point out here is like there are obviously specialized tools. Like if you look at the payment option, especially there are loads of tools that are especially helping you to process your payment. But then on the other end, I put what I call hybrids. There are loads of tools as well who try to give you some combination. So actually, I put Ghost here under publishing, as I just heard someone of you using Ghost. Ghost would also be kind of hybrid, right? Because Ghost also, it allows you to do your publishing, but at the same time, it helps you also to monetize your newsletter, for instance, the same that Substack would do in the end, but in a slightly different way. And B2B, the tool that we are building, is also one of those hybrids. Steady is very popular in Europe, especially, also helping you with your monetization of a newsletter, but also giving you more and more publishing tools. So you can actually choose to kind of become a Substack publisher, a Steady publisher. So this is something really important to look into because it takes some headaches away for you, of course, if you use one of those hybrids, but it also gives you less flexibility maybe in the end. So you need to see if it fits and if it also scales with you. Here are a few examples now, and actually I think Will, you were going to chat through those of some tool stacks, some newsrooms, especially for this tool stack that we just showed.
Yeah, I mean, so by far the most common thing we see is obviously WordPress. Everyone's using WordPress for better or worse. MemberPress is a very kind of common plugin for WordPress that gives you kind of basic, taking money, ability to take money, and then people use Google Forms, and like I said earlier, MailChimp is really ubiquitous, but very expensive, and not many people actually like it. It's just kind of, they've cornered a lot of the market. Airtable is basically sort of kind of spreadsheet with extra stuff, and it's very, very flexible, but you often need someone who knows Airtable to help you help get the most out of Airtable, sort of thing. And then Slack, and Zapier is a tool for connecting different things. At the cable, we use WordPress, obviously, and then B2B is the tool that we built with Corrective. So it kind of is we're lucky in that it's very kind of specifically tailored to all the things we need. So it does our payment, our surveys, our newsletter. Well, it connects to MailChimp for our newsletters. It connects to Discourse for like people talking to each other. We have like very good analytics through a thing called Grafana, which is basically a way of doing graphs. And then Bristol is very lucky to have we've got our very own website for finding about all the events that are happening in Bristol. So we also connect to that, but that's obviously very specific to the Bristol cable. And then
Yeah, and, I added one more example here from Germany. This is a podcast, Lage der Nation, it's called. And I find them quite interesting because they, for instance, also hold some values very high, also really believe in open source technology, build some open source contributors themselves as well. And just checked their tool stack, and beside the CMS, WordPress. I don't know now how they distribute their podcast, but that wasn't like a part of the community side of things. But they've got a big community on Discourse, so that's an open source discussion platform, which looks a bit like a forum, which works super well for them, and is actually allowing them also to send like automatic updates about discussions of the community via email. So there's always the podcast updates happening, but also updates from the community, from the forum. The Memberful is a very common tool as well for handling your membership. Haven't heard anything bad yet. Competitor for us as well. So I was brave and put them in here. And
I remember, Julia, we were talking about them when I was formerly at a magazine, and I wasn't sure if they were ready for Europe yet. I think that was an open question.
Nice. And then Spreadshop I put on here because I thought that's nice. They run a little shop as well with merch, and it's a good revenue stream for a media organization, especially actually mission and value driven media organizations, to also make some extra money through a shop. Correctiv even have their own publishing kind of, how do you say, publishing house, so we have to distribute books as well. So I think there's a lot there in terms of revenue streams for media, so I added that in as well. And it also connects to the community aspect, of course. Having a little shop for your fans is a good thing. And then they are also using MailChimp, but I'm sure also as almost everyone want to get away from it. And I saw someone here is using Brevo. I would be really interested in your experience with using that. We keep discussing also building an integration to that.
Okay, so we're getting into the bits of like how, you've seen all the array of tools you can you can use, and probably a lot of people here have got experience with, double the number of tools of that sort of thing. So how in the kind of real world do we balance the trade-offs of kind of choosing the right tool versus the amount of time it's going to take to, reach perfection or whatever. So some of the trade-offs are like, how much customization do you need to be able to have? Can you just take an off-the-shelf thing for this particular thing you're trying to solve, or do you need to be able to add your own little bits to it? How quickly do you need it to be going? Kind of how scalable is it? So if you grow, and that can be both in terms of just the number of people using it, but also the cost. Really, like a lot of cloud-based platforms in particular kind of get you in quite cheap at the start, and then they ramp it up as you become more successful. Do you have the in-house expertise? So really not many people have developers, unfortunately, but as Julia says, most of us are kind of slowly, well, most companies are basically in some way a tech company these days. And then how much ownership of the kind of data do you need? So that's the kind of privacy aspect as well. So is it okay to not own all the data that you're putting into these systems, or that sort of thing? And then data portability is about, can you move it if things go wrong? Can you move it to another location? So maybe, yeah. And then I think with every decision is basically the kind of like spectrum of being fully independent and building totally your own thing versus being fully dependent on, for example, social media or any other kind of platform that's like totally you're putting your data into their databases basically, and you've got no way of getting it back out. And obviously in the dream world where everyone's a tech company, you're building your own software every single time, but in the real world that is kind of impossible for all of us. So it's about kind of choosing for each kind of like tool that you might need to use, where is the appropriate place on this spectrum, and like not being, I don't know, like ashamed basically of using the full dependency sometimes if you need to.
But also maybe don't shy away from sometimes building your own, and maybe also trying to fundraise for that. Because what you're doing might be specific, and you might have ideas and want to innovate in spaces where you need to customize and you want to try new things. And a bit of a compromise there, of course, is if you do use an open source solution that you can build on. That's basically what the cable does now. Like they started building BAB, then we started to develop it further together and to make it available to everyone. But the cable still forked the code now. That means they basically use the same code base, but they can build on top of it if they need something special. So this is at least a small compromise, right? To not fully build your own. And Follow the Money, for instance, in the Netherlands, they built their totally own CMS because that's the space where they want to innovate. So you need to know, like, where do you want to innovate, basically. So they build their CMS, but then maybe they don't build their own special kind of collaboration tools or CRM.
Yeah, I think you need to ask yourself really serious questions before you start building your own thing, though, because the problem with software is that once you've started building it, you need to maintain it forever, and that is a huge problem for small organizations. So, if you can kind of collaborate, or when the cable started building our own membership system, BAB, we always had the intention that the only way it was going to carry on going is if we kind of like started collaborating with other newsrooms and sort of pooled resources, basically. So, unless you're, I don't know, The Guardian with 100 developers or whatever, you're very unlikely to be able to maintain your own tool stack for a long time, basically.
Yeah.
There's a hand up from Mira.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to share our experience because way back, more than a dozen years ago, when we started first time, we did build our own CMS because that was like almost pre WordPress days when, many of these CMS did not have they were not feature rich, they didn't offer what we wanted. So we did develop and we did just manage to sustain it for about 5 to 6 years. But on hindsight, I think, a simple blogging platform would have been started. So in early stages, I feel it's much better to just go ahead with open source or like third-party tools. Focus on the content, get the product mix right, understand what the audience wants, and then think about what additional features we may want. Yeah, so that's been my learning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Totally. Yeah, Outriders was another example. I think you've got also a couple of Polish newsrooms in the batch. So Outriders also first built their own thing, and then they actually switched over again, for instance, for their payment that went to Patronite now, which is a special Patreon in Poland. So yeah, and open source, we just said it, so we've got another little input on that.
So yeah, I mean, this question comes up quite a lot in a lot of the conversations I'm involved in is, should you use open source software whenever you can? Because I think probably most people agree that there's open source can often be the kind of more value-driven thing. It's something certainly I believe in, that kind of projects that are kind of in the commons, as in like anyone can kind of see them and modify them and change them and stuff. That's like really good, and there's some positives like we've put here. So you're not locked into a particular provider. So for example, take WordPress as a really easy example. If your WordPress provider decided to go down, you could just copy and paste your WordPress site to another place and it would work exactly the same way. And that's a really nice advantage of open source. Or you could even host it yourself if you were in an environment where you couldn't find like a WordPress host. And then obviously, like, because it's open source and you want to innovate on top of that project, you can, because you can just modify it. So you can, it gives you the ability to kind of be on the cutting edge. And a lot of us are on the cutting edge of, news, basically. So we need to be able to innovate with our tool stacks. We've talked about living your values, and then there's the potential for collaboration where, you and another newsroom, for example, both want the same feature. You can put in a bit of money together to make it happen, or other people will add features to the code base that then benefit you. And in theory, it can be very beneficial. But if you bring up the negatives, for a lot of this, you obviously need access to a developer to really realize the full potential of you know, especially the things around experimenting with new features, you can't really do that without having someone who's going to develop those new features for you. And I think it's safe to say that we've probably all had experiences with open source software where, you know, as much as we want to love it, it's just really not as good as, you know, whatever proprietary solution is out there, because it doesn't have the kind of millions of pounds behind the user experience and that sort of thing. And that often also can translate into the levels of support that you're going to get from that tool. And obviously none of these is universal, and there's plenty of paid for proprietary software where you get rubbish support as well. But it's, you know, open source software has its problems, and as like especially for the cable, as a very small newsroom with barely any resources, we really have to kind of like have a trade-off between the values we want and the things that get the job done. You know, do you use Nextcloud or Google Workspace? Well, ultimately we've decided to use Google Workspace because it just is out of the way. So it's hard to answer that question with a yes or a no, really. It's sort of like one of the reasons why we built our own open source CRM is essentially because we decided that our like community data was one of the most important pieces of data for us. So that was the data that we most wanted to be in control of. So we thought that's where we needed the most kind of data ownership. So it's partly like, what is your most valuable thing, where you really, if you lost it, you'd lose your organization.
Yeah.
Something sensitive.
I think we actually have to come to an end and maybe also give a bit of more time for questions. This hour just went so quickly. Just maybe one last thing when talking about trade-offs, like an ethical approach is something that you might also want to think about. I just want to encourage you to take a look at the markup, who are one of the main media organizations. They're from New York. Who are really fully embracing privacy for their users, and use it as well as a kind of offering, like as a product offering, as they say, like communicating these kind of values around your technology as well to your users, can also kind of turn to product offering. So just a little hint to look at those. And we skip this now then, and this. And we can send you these links as well in the chat for finding the guide that we've been using here as well, that you can work through all those questions on your own afterwards. Where do I have our contact data now? Wait a second, here. So anything you want to discuss still in this session that went over too quickly?
Yeah, feel free to unmute and ask a question, or give us a comment, or put it in the chat, and we can read it out. Mira's put in the chat, what would help is a good tech ecosystem for media. It's just not there in most countries. So yeah, I mean that's really true. Like most tech companies just aren't set up to address the needs of independent media, basically.
Yeah, most newsrooms are like either well-funded and they have access to the, the best of software, or you have like at the lower end people trying to, cobble stuff together, but you don't have the kind of tech expertise. And while tech expertise itself is not hard to find, but many of them don't really understand the need of like media houses, especially independent media.
One thing I will say is that it's really worth thinking about this stuff early on. When I joined the cable, we used to have a joke that we didn't know how many members we had because they were on like 5 different spreadsheets, and it always feels like something you don't want to talk about is the technology when you're starting your organization, but you save yourself a lot of pain if you kind of think about some of these things early on.
Could you explain a little bit about how do you keep the CRM at the center and how do you link to it?
At the center of, could you just clarify the question? Sorry.
So in your earlier, I think, diagram, you had this you had the CRM in the middle, and then you had the the CMS was there, and then all these other tools. But how do you actually do this linkages? Is it are there like common databases they're sharing, or how do you customize that?
So the CRM acts as kind of like I guess what you could call the source of truth. So it's like the central database where everything's stored, and then depending on the tool. So for example, with MailChimp, every time someone signs up to the Bristol Cable, the tool lets MailChimp know that they've signed up, so they also get signed up to our newsletter and things like that. And then some of the tools like the payment are kind of fully integrated into the system. So it varies depending on the connection. But one of the advantages we have is that because we're building our own tool, whenever we need a connection, we can create that connection like in a very
So you just got this API linking from one point to another.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's either an API link or it's kind of built into the system itself.
Okay. Because I think most of us are probably using independent tools, like even something as simple as in Google Analytics, you have the pages and the views, and then in your CMS, you probably have kind of sliced and diced those pages into different taxonomy. So if I want to say, how are my environment articles doing, there's no standard way of doing it, right? Because the two databases are separate. So you'll have to either manually crunch it together or find some way to do that connection. And I think this is probably something that every newsroom faces. How do you have different tools talking to each other without the tech expertise, like sitting and writing an API call or something?
Yeah. For some of this, it's definitely worth looking at a tool called Zapier, which is a kind of non-technical way of connecting different tools together. And there's a few other tools out there. They're called kind of like automation tools, basically, so they can connect things up in different ways, as long as the tool supports Zapier. But because it's such a big tool, lots of tools do support Zapier, if you see what I mean. I'll put it in the chat.
So Zapier can also get into tools, or is it just that if this, then that kind of a thing? I'll check it out. I'm not really.
It's like if this then that.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I think Ryan has jumped off. Is that right?
Any sample sort of reports or something that you think would be useful? Like, I don't know if you have any examples to show how to kind of understand the performance, both in terms of, the readership as well as the speed and all these different parameters that we should all be looking at.
So do you mean kind of like the speed of the website there and things like that, or?
Yeah, so I mean the different kind of metrics, right? One is on the readership side, then the the website performance side, and then maybe I don't know, the social outreach. I mean, there are different aspects that we every newsroom looks at. So any examples of how you kind of present those, pull those together into dashboards, or maybe other people here may also have their experiences and best practices.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for things like website performance and stuff like that, then you might have had of Google, like the page speed insights. That is the kind of like de facto tool that you basically have to check your website against page speed insights because Google uses it to rank your results. Well, I mean, it might not make much of a difference, but it can make a difference to the traffic you get.
And I understood you also meant generally recommendations for dashboard, right? Like just that pulls together different analytics and just have one place for like looking at your website performance and usage, but also maybe your engagement. Or did I get that wrong? Were you just talking about page speed? Mira?
Sorry, you were asking me. I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you meant like a general dashboard and like, because Will presented earlier as well that at the Cape they're using Grafana as a tool.
Okay.
And that is in the end dashboard, isn't it, Bristol? Bristol. Will.
Yeah, I mean our analytics is still pretty rough, to be honest. Like there's no connection between the website, kind of the new, the news website analytics and the membership system analytics. So we can see lots of things like if we do a campaign, we can see that people will like increase their contribution or they'll join, but we can't be sure that they've come from that campaign. We just know that, it happened at the same time. So there's at the moment, no real connection, but we have fairly good analytics on, when people leave, how long people stay for, the sort of basics of membership. And then we have analytics on the website, how much people are reading articles, but those two things aren't connected.
Yeah, that's sort of a typical challenge.
That's
Do
the
you
big-
use
exactly, yeah.
Google Analytics? Are there other ones which are less invasive that you